My parents kicked me out when I was 17. "You'll be back begging in a month," my mother smirked, as my father slammed the door in my face. I was furious, but I never turned back. 9 years later, my phone was filled with missed calls. They were the ones begging me to pick up. I never planned to share this story online, but after seeing similar posts, I thought maybe putting it all into words might help. Or maybe someone else dealing with family issues could find a bit of strength from it. So, here goes. My name's Brady. I'm 26 now, but this all started when I was 17, during my junior year of high school. I was never the ideal son my parents dreamed of. My dad worked at a manufacturing plant, and my mom was a receptionist. We weren't wealthy, but we lived comfortably enough in our small town. They had my entire future mapped out. Get good grades, go to state university like my dad, marry a nice local girl, have 2 kids, and live their version of the American dream. The only problem? I hated school. Not because I was stupid. I actually got decent grades when I cared enough to try. But I had undiagnosed ADHD back then. Sitting through long lectures about subjects that meant nothing to me was pure torture. What I did love, though, was working with my hands, building, fixing, creating. At 15, I helped our neighbor Judah renovate his garage all summer, and for the first time, I felt like I was good at something. My parents hated it. Every time I mentioned learning a trade or going into construction, my mom's face would tighten, like I'd said I wanted to be a garbage collector. My dad would go on about living up to my potential and how people like us don't work with our hands. Looking back, I think they were obsessed with appearances. They wanted something to brag about, not a son who built things. By that spring, things were unbearable. I had a part-time job after school, secretly saving money because I had a feeling I might need it. My grades were dropping because, honestly, I'd stopped caring. Every dinner turned into a fight about college, about my future, about how I was throwing my life away. The breaking point came 6 weeks before graduation. I had gotten into state, thanks to my parents filling out most of the application. But I'd also applied to a trade program in construction, cheaper, shorter, and actually interesting. I even got a partial scholarship for the projects I'd done. I decided to tell them over dinner. Big mistake. As soon as I mentioned trade school, my dad threw his fork so hard it bounced off the plate. My mom started crying, like I'd announced I had a terminal illness. The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. My dad called me ungrateful, accused me of disrespecting their sacrifices. My mom kept saying she was disappointed, that she didn't understand where she went wrong. When I tried explaining why I was passionate about the program, my dad cut me off with words I'll never forget. "No son of mine is going to waste his life like that. If you're too stupid to see the opportunity you're throwing away, then maybe you're not the son we thought you were." Something in me snapped. I told them I was done living my life to please them, that I was almost an adult, and I deserved to make my own choices. The shouting got uglier. Finally, my dad said, "If you won't follow our rules, get out of my house." I think he expected me to apologize, but I didn't. I went upstairs, grabbed the emergency bag I'd already packed, stuffed in as many clothes as I could, my laptop, $1,200 in cash, and my important documents. I had prepared for this moment without even realizing it. When I came downstairs, they both looked stunned. My mom started crying again, begging me not to make a huge mistake. My dad stood silent, arms crossed. As I walked out, my mom shouted, You'll be back begging in a month. You have no idea how hard the real world is." That smirk on her face broke something inside me. My dad didn't say a word, just slammed the door. I stood in the rain on our front lawn, numb, realizing I was officially on my own. Then I called my friend Corey. His parents, unlike mine, were kind people. They let me crash on their couch, but I knew I couldn't stay forever. I was still finishing high school while figuring out how to survive. Some days, I'd panic in the school bathroom, realizing I was technically homeless. What kept me going was pure anger. I refused to prove my parents right. Corey's mom helped me apply for emergency aid, since I was classified as an unaccompanied minor. My school counselor, one of the few adults who actually cared, helped me through the emancipation process. I took more hours at my job and even picked up another dishwashing gig. The hardest part wasn't money. It was the emotional toll. Watching other kids go home to loving families, while I wondered why mine had given up on me. It took me weeks to accept that what they did wasn't normal, that love shouldn't come with conditions. About 3 weeks later, my mom texted me, not to ask how I was, but to say, "When you're ready to apologize and accept our help under our rules, you can come home." I ignored it. A week later, my dad left a voicemail with the same message. They were so sure I'd fail. I graduated high school living on Corey's couch. My parents showed up at the ceremony, pretending to be proud for appearances. I walked right past them. By June, I'd saved enough to move into a small apartment with 2 other guys. It was a dump, but it was mine. I enrolled in trade school, working almost full-time to pay for it. Every time I wanted to quit, I'd remember my mom's smirk and my slammed door, and I'd keep going. That first year was brutal. I was lonely, broke, exhausted. Some nights I cried myself to sleep, but I never went back. Not after a month, not ever. After I shared that story online, people wanted to hear more. So here's what happened next. Those first few months living on my own were a nightmare. After leaving Corey's, I moved into a filthy apartment with 2 guys, Marcus, who worked nights, and Tyler, who was probably selling drugs, but paid his rent on time. The place had roaches, a freezing shower, and paper-thin walls. But it was still home. I juggled 2 jobs, the hardware store at night and the diner on weekends, while attending trade school. I barely slept, lived off ramen and leftover fries, and lost 20 pounds. Meanwhile, my social media was full of kids my age at parties and family vacations, while I was counting quarters for bus fare. My parents tried reaching out again. Still the same message: stop being stubborn, come home, follow our plan. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Once, my dad even showed up at the hardware store. I hid in the stockroom until he left. Watching him stand in the parking lot for 15 minutes before driving away broke something in me. But I didn't go after him. Things finally started to change about 4 months in. A regular customer named Santiago came in one day needing specific parts. I helped him find them and explained how to install them, even drew him a quick diagram. He turned out to be a contractor doing home renovations and offered me part-time work. It paid better and actually matched what I was learning. Santiago was nothing like my dad. He respected hard work and took pride in craftsmanship. He'd pause in the middle of a job just to teach me a trick or explain why a certain technique mattered. For the first time, I felt genuinely seen, not judged. Around the 6-month mark, my parents switched tactics again. My mom texted that she missed me. My dad said they were willing to compromise if I moved back home. It just made me angry. They still didn't get it. I didn't leave to rebel. I left because I needed to live. I finished my first year of trade school with solid grades. Turns out I wasn't stupid. I just needed to study something I cared about. Santiago gave me more responsibility and better pay. I moved into a cleaner apartment with one roommate, Aiden, a broke nursing student, but a decent guy. By 19, I earned my first certification and was finally making enough to live decently, paying bills on time, eating real meals, even saving a little. Santiago started recommending me for side jobs. I was slowly building a reputation. Working inside people's homes, I saw what real families looked like. Parents proud of their kids, houses full of laughter and warmth. It made me realize how wrong my upbringing was. When I was almost 20, my mom showed up unannounced. I barely recognized her. She looked older, tired. She glanced around my small apartment, clearly unimpressed, then got to the point. My dad had been passed over for a promotion, and they were struggling financially. She wanted to know if I could help. I actually laughed. 2 years earlier, they threw me out, certain I'd fail, and now they wanted my help? I told her I was still getting on my feet and couldn't spare anything. She left annoyed, without a word of pride or acknowledgement. After that visit, I spiraled a bit, started questioning if I was being too harsh by keeping them away. But then I remembered. They never apologized. They never showed love without conditions. That anger reminded me why I left. My roommate Aiden noticed my mood and introduced me to his friend Lucy, a psychology student. She helped me realize that what I'd gone through was emotional abuse, love based on control and compliance, not care. Talking to her helped me process years of guilt and finally start healing. By 21, I had my own one-bedroom apartment. Small, simple, but completely mine. I remember sitting on my second-hand couch, crying, because I'd made it. I survived. Around that time, Santiago offered me a stable, full-time position with benefits. My first real job with health insurance and steady income. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt safe. His trust and respect meant more to me than my parents' approval ever could. Meanwhile, my parents, the same people who once said I'd fail, were struggling. But I had learned something by then. Walking away doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it's the first step toward finally living. I kept trying to reconnect, but always on their terms. They'd invite me to family dinners, make subtle remarks about my choices, and offer help I never accepted, always with strings attached. Every encounter left me drained and frustrated. Eventually, I reduced contact to the occasional text and maybe one visit a year. What they never seemed to realize was that I was quietly building a good life. It didn't match their expectations, but it was mine. I had steady work that paid the bills and friends who accepted me for who I was. I was creating something real, something that belonged entirely to me. By 23, I had earned additional certifications and had become Santiago's go-to person for specific projects. We worked well together, and he began mentioning bigger opportunities for the future. Around that time, I met Lydia. She needed repairs done in her apartment, and Santiago sent me to help. She was smart, funny, and didn't tolerate any nonsense. We started dating, and for the first time, I let someone see all of me. The baggage, the family history, everything. She understood. Her parents weren't perfect either, though nowhere near as controlling as mine. When my parents heard I was in a serious relationship, their sudden interest in my life returned. They started following me on Instagram after years of silence, wanting to meet Lydia and act like we were one big happy family. But I kept them at a distance. Lydia deserved better than to be caught in their manipulative games. 4 years after being kicked out, I was stable, my own place, a healthy relationship, and a life I built entirely on my terms. My parents' prediction that I'd come crawling back within a month couldn't have been more wrong. But the story didn't end there. Just as I thought I'd finally escaped their shadow, life threw in a twist I never saw coming. I'll share part 3 tomorrow. Things are about to change for both me and my parents in unexpected ways. Hey everyone, thank you for sticking with my story. Your support means more than you can imagine. Picking up where I left off, by 24, life had settled into something close to normal. I'd been jumping between jobs, slowly gaining experience and saving whenever possible. Nothing glamorous, mostly hard labor, but it kept me afloat. My apartment was a small studio, barely enough room for a mini fridge and microwave. But it was mine. No roommates, no parents, just me and a collection of second-hand furniture. One night, while scrolling through Facebook, the Boomer app, I got a notification. My cousin Madison had tagged me in a photo from a family gathering I obviously hadn't attended. I didn't think much of it until I saw my parents in the background. My mom wore that familiar fake smile, and my dad was mid-sentence, probably telling one of his same old stories. But what stood out was the framed photo on the table, my high school graduation picture. These were the same people who kicked me out and barely contacted me, now displaying my photo like we were some close, happy family. I called Madison immediately. She told me they often talked about me, telling everyone how proud they were. The audacity! It was like they lived in some alternate version of reality where they hadn't disowned me. Around that time, I met Lydia, not in some movie-style moment, but in line at Target. The checkout was taking forever, and we started joking about it. She spoke her mind freely, no filter, just raw honesty. We exchanged Instagrams, started texting, and clicked instantly. On our third date, I opened up about my family's situation, expecting the usual awkward response, but instead, she shared her own story about a controlling stepdad. She understood what that kind of environment did to a person. That night, we talked until 3 a.m., and for the first time, I didn't feel like my family drama was a shameful secret. A few months later, my water heater broke, flooding my bathroom. I had to shut off the main valve and take cold showers at the gym for 3 days. Lydia offered to let me stay with her, but my stubborn independence made me decline. Around that time, my high school friend Corey got engaged and invited me to his wedding. I hadn't seen those people in years and was nervous. They might think I'd failed, that I'd disappeared without direction. But when I showed up with Lydia, everyone was just normal. They asked about my life, listened without judgment. Then came the awkward part. Corey's mom, who'd let me stay at her place right after I was kicked out, pulled me aside and said my parents had been asking about me. Apparently, they'd run into her at the store, fishing for information about my life, work, and finances. That last detail raised alarms. Sure enough, a week later, my mom texted, "Your father and I are having a small Memorial Day gathering. It would be lovely if you came. Bring your friend if you like." Friend, not girlfriend. And the timing, right after asking about my finances, felt suspicious. I showed Lydia the message. She smirked and said, "They want something." I decided to go, partly out of curiosity, partly still searching for closure. Lydia came along, despite joking it was bound to end badly. Walking into that house felt surreal. Everything looked exactly the same. Same furniture, same photos, same air freshener that always gave me a headache. But it didn't feel like home. I felt like a guest. The small gathering included my parents, my aunt and uncle, and one of Dad's old colleagues with his wife. Everyone acted overly casual, like I'd just been away at school all these years. I waited for the real reason for the invite, and it came after dinner. Dad pulled me into his study, that sacred room I'd never been allowed in as a kid. He started with small talk about the economy before admitting the truth. He'd been laid off after 27 years at the same company, replaced by a younger employee with a degree who worked for less. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all those years he'd pushed me toward college, now he resented college graduates. He didn't ask directly for money, but hinted about family supporting family in hard times. All I could think about was the night they'd thrown me out, my mom's smirk, her words that I'd come crawling back. I told him I'd think about it. Lydia and I left shortly after, and in the car, she said, "That was the most passive-aggressive dinner I've ever survived." Over the next few weeks, my mom texted often, asking how I was, whether I'd thought about what Dad said, even offering me old furniture, since they were redecorating. I knew what that meant. They were selling things to cover bills. Meanwhile, my life was improving. I'd found a stable job with benefits, and Lydia and I were talking about moving into a bigger place together. Then came the Facebook post that changed everything. My mom wrote a long message about trusting God during hard times. Clearly meant to gain sympathy, but the last paragraph stunned me. "We're so blessed to have our son Brady supporting us through this trial. Family truly is everything." I nearly choked on my coffee. I hadn't given them a cent, yet there she was publicly claiming I was financially helping them. The comments were full of praise for me being such a good son. I called her immediately. She acted surprised by my reaction, saying she was just thankful for my emotional support, and that people must have misunderstood. But I knew what she was doing, creating public pressure so I'd feel guilty enough to help. That night, Lydia found me working on a spreadsheet, trying to see if I could afford to give them money. She sat beside me and asked, "What would you tell a friend in your shoes?" It hit me hard. If someone told me their parents had kicked them out, ignored them for years, and now expected help, I'd say they didn't owe them anything. So I made my choice. I texted my mom, saying I couldn't offer financial support. I explained I was still building my own life, still recovering from what happened years ago. I suggested local programs for job seekers and financial aid, the same ones I had once used. Her only reply was a single "okay." Then silence. 3 weeks later, my phone exploded. Texts, calls, voicemails from my parents and relatives. Their situation had worsened. Dad still hadn't found work, and foreclosure was looming. Suddenly, it was my problem to solve. One voicemail from my aunt said, "You need to step up and be the man your father raised you to be." The irony made me laugh out loud. That night, Lydia and I talked for hours about boundaries, responsibility, and the line between forgiveness and self-sacrifice. I still don't know exactly what I'll do. Part of me wants to help. They're still my parents. But another part remembers standing on that lawn, bags in hand. Nothing. Hearing my mom tell me I'd fail without them. The roles have completely reversed now. 9 years later, they're the ones who can't manage without me. Tomorrow, I'm meeting them at a coffee shop, neutral ground. I've set my conditions and boundaries. Life's strange. 9 years ago, they thought I'd never survive on my own. Now, they're the ones asking for help. Maybe it's karma, or maybe just the universe's sense of humor. I'll update after the meeting. Thanks for reading, and for all the support. The night before my major investor meeting, I got a frantic call from my mom. At first, I ignored it. I was deep into my presentation prep, dealing with last-minute details. But then she called 4 more times. After that, my aunt called. Then, my cousin. Clearly, something was wrong. When I finally answered, my mom was crying so hard, I could barely make sense of her words. Once she calmed down, she told me that my dad had been laid off again. But this time, it was serious. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage, the car had broken down, and now they'd received an eviction notice. They had 2 weeks to come up with the money or lose the house. I sat there in my office, staring at my wall of awards and certificates, feeling nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. Annoyed. Annoyed that after 9 years, we were still here, still playing out the same pattern, still expecting me to drop everything and save them. And the timing, right before the biggest meeting of my career, couldn't have been worse. I told my mom I'd called her back, hung up, and sat there in silence. When Lydia walked in, she could immediately tell something was off. After I explained, she didn't offer advice. She simply asked how I wanted to handle it. That's one of the reasons I love her. I made my decision then. I deal with my parents after the investor meeting. One crisis at a time. I turned off my phone, focused, and pushed the family drama aside. The meeting went incredibly well. Better than I expected. The investors were engaged, impressed with my work and plans. They asked tough questions, but I was ready for them. By the end, they were talking not only about funding this project, but also about potential future collaborations. It was everything I'd worked toward since that rainy night 9 years ago when I'd stood on my parents' lawn with nowhere to go. When I turned my phone back on afterward, I had 27 missed calls from my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My voicemail was full. My messages were flooded. My mom had apparently rallied the entire family to pressure me into helping them. Driving home, I felt a strange mix: pride from the meeting, anger at my family's manipulation, and that familiar tug of guilt I couldn't quite shake. When I walked in, Lydia was on the couch with her laptop, looking both worried and slightly incredulous. She turned the screen toward me. My mom had posted a long, emotional message on Facebook about losing their home and how certain people had forgotten that family comes first. She didn't name me, but it was obvious who she meant. Relatives had commented things like, "I'm sure Brady will help when he finds out," and "family always comes through." I stood there reading those comments, feeling my blood pressure rise. They were publicly shaming me into rescuing them again. That was the breaking point. I'd had enough of the blurred boundaries, the guilt trips, and the strained family visits. I decided right then that this cycle either had to be fixed or ended for good. I texted my parents, saying I'd come by tomorrow, just the 3 of us. No distractions, no more pretending. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything I wanted to say and how they might respond. Lydia stayed by my side, reminding me that whatever happened, we had a life we'd built together, a family made of people who'd actually shown up. The next morning, I drove to their house feeling calmer than I expected. The neighborhood looked the same, but their house didn't. The paint was peeling, the yard was overgrown, and the flower beds my mom once obsessed over were filled with weeds. It felt like a physical reflection of everything that had fallen apart. My dad opened the door. He looked older, thinner, worn down. He just nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the house was cluttered and smelled faintly of neglect. My mom sat at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw me, she launched straight into, "Thank God you're here. We knew you'd help." I cut her off, told them both to sit down. For once, they were going to listen. I laid everything out, how they'd thrown me out for choosing a different path, how they'd said I'd crawl back within a month, how they only ever reached out when they needed something, and how they'd never once taken responsibility for the damage they caused. My dad tried to interrupt with excuses, saying they'd done their best, that I was being ungrateful, that I owed them for raising me. I raised my hand and kept going. I told them about those first few months after they kicked me out, sleeping on couches, working multiple jobs, crying from exhaustion, figuring out how to survive because they'd decided their pride mattered more than their son. My mom started crying again, saying they'd made mistakes, but that family had to stick together. That's when I lost my patience. I asked her where that family sticks together energy was when I was 17 and homeless. I pointed out how they only remembered I was family when they needed help. The conversation kept looping. Half apologies followed by justifications, shifting blame, deflecting guilt. It was exhausting. Finally, I stopped them and set my conditions. I would help them avoid foreclosure once, but after that, they needed to move somewhere affordable. They had to delete that Facebook post and publicly clarify that they were handling their issues privately. If they wanted any relationship with me, we'd all attend therapy together, not to reconcile, but to build honest communication and set boundaries. They needed to accept that my life, relationship, and decisions were mine, and any future support would depend on them respecting that. I expected more guilt trips or arguments. Instead, my dad just looked tired, like he finally realized there was nothing left to bargain with. My mom seemed lost, glancing between us like she was waiting for him to fix it. Eventually, they agreed, not eagerly, but they did. I wrote them a check for the overdue mortgage right then, not out of obligation, but to end that chapter on my terms. As I left, my dad followed me to the porch. I thought he might try one last emotional plea, but instead, he quietly said, "You turned out all right. Better than all right. Not what I pictured, but you did good." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Probably the most genuine thing he'd said in years. I didn't respond immediately. I just stood on that same porch where he'd once slammed the door in my face 9 years ago. Finally, I said, "I know," and walked away. In the month since, things have been complicated. They've kept their end of the deal so far. Therapy is awkward but necessary. They're looking for smaller places. The Facebook mess is gone. I don't know if we'll ever have the kind of relationship other people have with their parents. Too much damage has been done. But at least now, what we have is real, not built on guilt or denial. And as for that scared 17-year-old standing in the rain all those years ago, he made it. He built a life on his own terms, surrounded by people who love him for who he is. He stopped letting rejection define him. That night, lying in bed beside Lydia, I finally deleted all those missed calls. They'd been sitting there for weeks, a digital reminder of old chaos. Watching them disappear, I didn't feel anger or triumph, just a quiet peace. 9 years ago, they thought I couldn't survive without them. Turns out it was the other way around. And that realization was worth more than any "I told you so."